We'll probably give it one more minute and then we'll get started. All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name's Mark Weicker, and I think we'll get started with the legal clinic. I'm with Albite Weicker, and we partner with Disability Rights Ohio and the Ohio Coalition for the Education of Children with Disabilities to put on the clinic every second Saturday. So thank you everyone for joining us. And today we're going to have the topic of transition to adulthood on the IEP, or transition planning on the IEP. And it's a fun topic. I think you'll see there's a lot of information to absorb, but I especially like transition. It seems to me that the students that we work with really like it. They get to think about what they're going to do after high school. And it's an opportunity they get because they're on an IEP, where students who don't have IEPs don't have that opportunity. They sometimes do through the guidance counselor and maybe do a little exploration, but this is a mandated kind of exploration required on the IEP. So I think it's a fun topic, and really looking forward to it. A couple things administratively. The slide that you see now has the link to register for the clinic. That's lawyersforstudents.com/legal clinic. And that's where you signed up to attend today. And if you're interested in signing up next month, we have the topic of alternative dispute resolution. And both me and Danielle will be presenting that one as well. So today's topic is number 6 in the series. And again, next month, the second Saturday, December 11th, procedural rights and dispute resolution. So if you want to sign up for that, use the link that you did to sign up for this one. And again, we have individual guidance sessions where me and Danielle, and today it's Emily from Disability Rights Ohio, meeting with individuals one-on-one after the workshop for individual guidance sessions. And those are done on a private link. We do have some openings for December if anyone's interested in those. The times are 11 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. Slots for each of us. So again, you can sign up through the same link. Okay, well, let's turn to the topic at hand, the transition. And like I mentioned, transition is fun. You'll see that it's a core component of the IEP, and that's because under IDEA, even in the purpose statement of the very first regulation in IDEA, you see that to ensure, the purpose is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free, appropriate public education, that term you hear so often, that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. And that's really what we're focused on today when we talk about transition planning, is those last 3 things: further education, employment, and independent living, the core components of transition planning right in the very first purpose statement of IDEA. So it's really fundamental, and it is a right that students on IEPs have to receive transition related planning. You'll see also that under the IDEA regulations, they define specifically transition services. As it says there, it's a set of activities which ultimately facilitates the child's movement from school to post-school activities, including post-secondary education, vocational education, integrated employment, continuing and adult education, adult services, independent living, and community participation. So some people assume sometimes that transition planning is always transition to college, but that's absolutely not accurate. And some people assume that it's transition to employment, and that's not accurate. It's both of those things plus independent living and community participation. So it's a broad set of services that can be offered through the IEP. Now, one thing you'll see is that IDEA requires transition-related goals on the IEP that's in effect when the student turns 16 years old. So you see there that those are the regulations kind of word for word, that there has to be appropriate, measurable post-secondary goals based upon age-appropriate transition assessments related to training, education, employment, and where appropriate independent living skills. And then the services have to be available. But some of you might be scratching your head that you think it starts sooner, and that's because in Ohio it does. So Ohio goes a little bit farther than the federal regulations and requires this at age 14, and we'll get to that in 1 second. It's also important to point out that, so we do have IDEA, which is a law that if you've attended these workshops, you know that we talk about a lot. It is the standard for the student rights that we articulate here. It's the standard for the obligations of the school districts that service students with disabilities. So you're probably somewhat familiar by now with IDEA, but with transition, there's actually a good amount of agency coordination, which doesn't exist a lot. Agencies sometimes operate independently, and in this case, I'm talking about school districts and let's say the Bureau of Vocational Rehab, or in Ohio, it's the Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities. But here, the laws do comport, and that causes a necessary and I would say an effective coordination among agencies. So the Vocational Rehabilitation Act provides funding and a directive for those agencies, BVR, state BVRs, to provide job exploration, work-based learning experiences, college counseling, workplace readiness training, and instruction on self-advocacy for individuals with disabilities broadly. And it makes sense to coordinate with schools, of course, who are working with individuals with disabilities who have not yet translated to adulthood. So, and that does, the law, the Vocational Rehabilitation Act has a provision that says that these agencies should coordinate with school districts and operate on the under IDEA and on the IEP. So there is some coordination there, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on. And this is what I was mentioning about Ohio. You may wonder how the federal law, IDEA, and Ohio, how can they have two separate obligations? There is something known as the Supremacy Clause in the U.S. Constitution, Article 6, Section 2, and it says that the Constitution and federal laws are usually, they take precedence over any state laws. But that's in the case that the state law conflicts with the federal law. Here, what Ohio's done is said, okay, we see that you're requiring us, federal law, IDEA, you're requiring us to provide transition-related goals and services at age 16, but we're going to go beyond that. We're going to provide some additional rights and services, which you can do. It doesn't conflict with the Supremacy Clause here because Ohio's added rights and said, we're going to start at age 14 and even sooner if the team decides it's appropriate, and provide those goals, those transition-related goals and services. Now, this is on the first IEP in which the student will turn 14. So, basically, if the student's 13 and you're amending the IEP or adopting a new annual IEP, then the the transition-related goals will have to be added to the IEP. All right. And speaking of the IEP, if we take a look, the first place you'll see anything related to transition-related goals is on the very first page right underneath the child's name. So will the child be 14 years old before the end of this IEP? If yes, then transition related goals have to be added. Is the child younger than 14 but has transition and post-secondary goal information? If that's a yes, you could start sooner. So those are the two questions you see right at the beginning. And then you'll see in section 5, there's a section that if the child is of age, that you'll add post-secondary transition goals. And there are 3 main categories, which, by the way, again, come right from the purpose statement of IDEA and the regulations. Post-secondary training and education. You'll see a little farther down, competitive integrated employment. And then thirdly, independent living as appropriate or if needed. So that's section 5, and that will be complete again if the child is of age. And that's kind of the basics for where the obligation comes from and why students have these rights. And I'm going to pass it on to Danielle, and I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself to Danielle. And she's going to talk a little bit more about how you might assess a student or adopt these goals.
Yes, good morning. So I am Danielle. If you have not attended any of our previous presentations, you may not know who I am. I am the advocate that works with Albert Waker, and I advocate for students to have appropriate special education services in the school setting, and that includes transition. And I find that transition is one of those pieces in the IEP that is not always a big focus. And it's really unfortunate because, like Mark had said, this, in my opinion, when you reach the transition part of your child's IEP, it's like a whole new world, a whole new ball game. And it's a really important and I think special time to talk about what is a school district going to do to help your child reach their potential after they graduate. So we're going to talk about transition a little bit more in depth. So Mark gave a really great overview, and I'm sure if any of you on this call do have a child of 14 or age 14 or older, you've been through this transition piece, and maybe you've questioned why the school district put the goals on there the way they did, or what assessment tools they used and why they used them. Or maybe you are in a district where the transition goals are not very strong and you think maybe we need to bolster those up a little bit. So our goal today is to talk about transition and really go in depth to why we want good transition assessments, why we want solid transition goals, and really how is that going to help your child, again, go up through their high school years or middle school years, starting at 14 and beyond. So transition overview. So once we hit this age 14, we're talking about transition. And when you start talking about transition, you want to add a transition statement in the future planning. So every year you sit down for your annual IEP meeting and we talk about future planning. Well, once your child reaches this point in their career in school, we want to talk about what that transition looks like for their future planning. So you want to have a statement into that section 1 on the IEP that talks about future planning. The district is going to start doing assessments with your child, whether that be an intervention specialist or a transition coordinator. And we talk about PENS because, special ed, we have to have acronyms for everything. So the PENS are the preferences, interests, needs, and strengths of your child. So the assessment tools that the district uses, it is supposed to look at all of those areas to be able to have some good goals, which is number 3. So once we do those assessments, we have goals in the IEP in section 5, like Mark had just shown us. And those goals are focused solely on transition. The goals are going to include number 4, transition activities and services. So you have the goal, you have the assessments, and then the district says, what are we going to do to reach that goal? And those are the transition activities and services. Thank you. All right, so 3 questions for transition assessments. And we do focus a lot on transition assessments because that is what makes the goal. And it's really important to have good transition assessments. So we do have a couple slides looking at this more in depth because we want to empower you as parents to ask questions about these assessment tools. So transition assessments, they must answer 3 questions. Where's your student now? Where are they going? And how will they get to where they want to go? And if the assessment tools the district is using does not answer these 3 questions, that we need some better assessments. We need more assessments. We need to collect more information to be able to answer these 3 questions. I know we have a question in the chat, Mark. I don't know if you want to pull that up.
Oh, that was just me. I forgot to tell everyone they could drop something in the Q&A if they want to, and everyone still feel free to do that.
Perfect. Okay, so now transition assessments, they can be formal or informal. And really, I think a good transition assessment includes both, because you can collect different information using both tools. Formal assessments are going to be career assessments, learning style inventories, any sort of academic achievement tests, adaptive behavior scales. Those things are a part of the ETR, as well as any personality assessments or interest inventories. What really sets the formal assessments and informal assessments apart is that formal assessments are data driven. So there is some sort of data that you can look at to measure your child against themselves or against their peers. And those assessments are reliable and they're valid. So there's some, some studies that have shown that these assessments are a good tool to use. Informal assessments are more of the observations, oh, you went too fast. Meetings or interviews with your child, any sort of general surveys or questionnaires, and these might be given to, all of the students or all the kids in a certain age band or group. So it's not specific to your child per se, but it is supposed to get more information about your child and again their goals, and any sort of self-determination assessments. So these are all things that the district will hopefully include in those assessments. And I posed a question. So where do you think curriculum-based assessments fall? So those assessments that the teachers may be doing in the classroom that are based on the curriculum your child is receiving. Mark, what do you think?
I'm taking a guess. I think it's informal.
You think it's informal? I think it's both. And I think it depends on the assessment that the teacher is using. So for instance, like what if we're using, I put myself on the spot on this one. What if we're using I don't know, a math assessment, because in that math class, we're learning about money. And so the curriculum-based assessment is looking at being able to identify coins. And let's say the teacher pulled this assessment tool off of a website online, and there's some validity to it. I mean, it could be formal. I will tell you, when I was researching for this presentation, they said it was a formal assessment, curriculum-based assessments, but I thought to myself, but it may be informal, because it may just be that the teacher is doing one-on-one assessments with that student based on what their particular goals are for their IEP, or if you have modifications in the classroom. So yeah, I think it can be both. So I wanted to see I was going to give you a trick question mark and see what you thought.
Yeah, that was a trick. I'm glad to know that it could be both.
Yes.
And we do have a question now. Okay. Are there common assessments that districts use, and what are the most common names of those assessments? Let's go one at a time. Are there common assessments?
So we're going to go a little bit more in depth to assessments, but I will say there probably are, and I'm just maybe not familiar with the names of them, but I've sat in a number of IEP meetings, and it's never been like, oh yeah, I've seen that one before. I've heard that one before. So I honestly don't think a lot of districts do use common assessments. I would assume, of course, in the school district themselves, they probably use this, common assessments, because maybe that's what they've been trained to use. But I do find that school districts typically use different things. And it's probably just, I would assume, personal preference. Whoever's working with those transition students, wherever they pull those assessments from. I think my biggest hang up is I find districts use too many informal assessments, and there's not enough formal assessments. So that's why I think it's important as a parent to make sure that both of these are being used.
And there was one I've seen a few times. I'll pull it up here and actually share it once I get it up. But there is some commonality, but I think you're right. Sometimes it's too much informal, and I don't know if there's any real standard. I know there's one that the educational service centers use pretty commonly among them. But the next question is, what are the most common names of those? I'll pull this one I've seen a few times up. and give you the name once I pull it up. And then can districts make their own assessments?
Yeah, I'd say so. I would say it's probably going to be falling into that informal assessment range, but yeah, they absolutely could make their own assessments. And yes, you can ask what assessments they're using, and it should be listed in that section 5. And if it's not listed, then absolutely ask what it is and ask to see an example. Yep. I mean, it's just like when you have progress reports for an IEP goal, and you can ask for that raw data. You can ask to see what assessments are using to progress monitor. So same thing, you can always ask to see what they're doing.
There are on occasion where, you know, a district may claim that the assessment is somehow like proprietary information and not able to be shared. However, I don't, with transition related assessments, I don't think that's going to be the case. It's not, you know, it's not going to be created by a company that the district buys or uses. It's more going to be, you know, more standard. I mean, I don't think it's the information's not as proprietary as it might be for like a mental health assessment, for instance.
Right. I mean, you do have copyright laws that sometimes fall under assessment tools, but I don't know of any transition assessment that would probably have a copyright. And if it did, I suppose the school could at least give you examples, maybe not show you the actual questions or the actual assessment tool, but maybe give you examples of what's being asked.
Yeah, and then the outcome, of course, is an education record. So you absolutely have a right to view it. Let me, can you still see the slideshow at this point?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Go ahead and I'll try to pull that assessment up in the meantime.
Okay. All right. So here are some examples of transition assessments. So we have adaptive behavior and daily living skill assessments. And this typically happens during that ETR, the evaluation team report, where we collect information. It's usually through a rating scale. And this helps determine the type and amount of personal assistance a person may need related to home-based support services, special education, vocational training, any sort of supported work that may be necessary, special living arrangements, personal care. So really looking at your child's ability to take care of themselves independently, go out into the community independently and access resources there. You know, again, being able to really be independent, that's really what it's measuring. Can your child do these things independently? Any sort of general and specific aptitude tests. Now, I do recall that, I mean, I think some school districts do for a certain grade band where they give them all the same aptitude test. And that helps with like classroom placements, maybe gifted, you know, AP placements. So those can be used in this section as well. And that's looking at any sort of specific skill or ability related to, you know, career or work. So it can measure general knowledge in a wide range of skills or test a very specific area, such as musical or clerical ability. If your child is looking at a vocational school, a lot of times the specific program they're looking at will have these aptitude tests to really focus in on the skills needed for that program. Interest inventories provide information about an individual's preferences for certain careers, occupational activities, or types of work. So it'll ask questions like, do you prefer you know, daytime or nighttime? Do you prefer working by yourself or working with groups? Do you prefer you know, using your hands or being, you know, being creative? So it asks all those different questions to really hone in on some jobs that your child might be good at. And then
Danielle, I'm just going to show this assessment real quick since I have it, and it's topical. It's an employability life skills assessment that I've seen on occasion. So just take me 1 second. Yeah, so this is from an educational service center in Ohio, and so this is supposed to be used through the life of the IEP or until the child graduates. And so you get a rating basically for each age. So these are ages listed here, 14, 15, 16 on up to 21. And then scores for each of these tasks related to employability, related to independent living skills.
I have not seen this one before.
I've seen it a couple times. So yes, I think there are some standard, and so, you know, many will be similar to this, I would say. All right, I'm going to get the slideshow back.
All right, thank you. So the last one on this slide is intelligence tests. And then again, these are a part of the evaluation team report, and they assess general cognitive abilities. So when you look at the different skills that are measured on an intelligence test, it could help. Again, look at your strengths and weaknesses. Do you learn more through hearing and verbal instruction versus visual spatial skills like using your hands? Maybe your child has processing speed that's a little bit slower than their typical peers, so that's important to keep in mind when we're looking at jobs that may be at a slower pace, maybe not like a warehouse job, for instance, where you have to be on. So yeah, I think all of these are really good assessment tools to use, and these are all formal assessments, because interest inventory is probably be informal. Actually, I lied about that. All right, so next one is achievement tests, and this looks at specific academic skills, so your reading, writing, and math skills. Temperament inventories or instruments. This looks at your students' disposition toward various types of careers and work. And so it's gonna probably ask a lot of different questions about, I don't know, and I can't even think of examples, but do you like working outdoors? Maybe you would be a really good park ranger. Or do you like doing the same thing every day? So maybe you'd prefer an office job, a clerical job. Are you a really good animal person? Maybe veterinarian is a good spot for you. So it looks at how you are as a person, your characteristics and personality traits, and how that could be applied to a job. And I will say the reason why I love all these assessments and using a whole bunch of them to come up with goals is because how many times, especially a 14-year-old, do you hear your students say, I want to be, I don't know, something, right? Something that's way out here. And you think to yourself, may not be the best fit for you. And so it's great to have all these assessments and sitting down with the student and doing these assessments and having these conversations to help show the student, this is really what I think that you're going to be great at, what you're going to like and enjoy. And so that's why we want to gather all of this information to get some good goals in place.
And
All right.
Danielle, I got a private chat question here, and it says, can can a student use their current job or a job that they want as part of the IEP? And I can answer that. I've done it in the past with a high school student who worked at Wendy's, and they absolutely, now after doing the assessments and writing the goals, one of his goals was to, work X hours a week at Wendy's and then work on a promotion to the cashier. So something, it's been a couple of years, but we have used like current employment that may have existed, prior to consideration of the transition goals or was going to exist anyway. And absolutely, you can incorporate that into the IEP.
Yeah, absolutely. Self-determination assessments help identify student readiness to make decisions about adult life by determining strengths and needs related to decision-making and choice-making. And so that's really good to look at those independent living skills. And then transition planning inventories. So looking at your students' goals, awareness, strengths, and needs related to various aspects of adult living, like employability, post-secondary schooling and training, independent living, interpersonal relationships, and community living. So when we're sitting down and we're talking about these assessments, we want to really have these questions in mind. So I guess maybe more so the goals, not really the assessments, but we're talking about the goals. What does your child plan to do this upcoming school year and after graduation? What interests, strengths, and needs does your child have? How can these interests, strengths, and needs be supported and incorporated into the IEP? What skills does your child possess? And what does your child want to do after high school in terms of working, living, and learning? What do you as the parent want your child to do after high school? And what will they do for recreation and leisure? I think we ignore this oftentimes with our students. We focus so much on work and school, and we don't focus on what do they want to do in their free time? How will they be involved in the community? What supports and courses will they need to be transition ready? And then imagine not only the here and now, but thinking ahead to the future. Where and how will your child continue to learn after they graduate? Where will they work and where will they live? And I will say, I sit down with parents a lot of times and ask these questions and brainstorm ideas and, asking, Can your child stay home by themselves? Do you feel safe having them home by themselves? If an emergency happened, do they know what to do? Can they cook their own food? Can they wake up on time and get themselves ready for school? So all of those questions are really important for you to ask yourself, because those are goals that can be worked on in high school to get them ready for the future.
Yeah, another big one is, can they ask and receive help? Are they good at that? Have they done that on their own before? Sometimes as parents for any student, we tend to do that for our children. So building that skill of, talking to the doctor or calling, a service provider for some help, or even asking a parent for help when they need it, or those are things that may not just exist.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having in mind what your child wants to do with the job they want and where they want to live, and thinking about the skills they need to be independent in doing those, where are they lacking? What do we need to work on? So those are, again, really important questions to ask yourself. So then after you have the assessments, then you have the goal. And after that, they talk about activities and services that the district is going to do with your child to help them reach that goal. So they may have some specialized instruction to build self-advocacy skills, looking at social skills, academic or study skills. They may want to incorporate some community experiences like internships, maybe shadowing, which I think is great, paid employment, maybe going to explore a campus they're interested in. We talk about competitive integrated employment. So this came about years and years ago, because oftentimes when you had a child who had a specific disability category, disability itself, we would talk about having them work in a workshop, which I don't think maybe they exist. I don't know. I know back when 10 years ago, that is kind of what we were looking at for some of our students. And so then ODE said, no, we need to look at competitive integrated employment. So these children should be paid the same as everyone else. And we should, have the same expectations for them as well. And so we want to, again, keep that in mind of what your child can do, what they want to do, and how we can support them.
Also, it's similar to a placement in school with competitive integrated employment. They should be working with non-disabled peers.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking at post-secondary training and education, incorporating some related services. I think communication is huge. So if your child wants to work at a library, they're going to be interacting with people. They need to have good communication skills to do that. And so again, if that's your child's goal and that's what they want to do, then ask those questions. If they already have a speech pathologist tied to the IEP, then we can incorporate them also into a transition goal to work on that, to maybe do some role playing, problem solving. What if they work at Wendy's and you have an angry customer? What are you going to do? So incorporating those related service providers into the transition goals. Again, behavior supports. If they're already working with an intervention specialist to work on behavior, they can be tied to this part of the IEP as well, really focused and specific on those transition goals. And then looking at daily living skills. So looking at the hygiene, their health, their safety. Can they manage money? Again, can they get up? Can they set an alarm and get up on time and get themselves ready for school? Can they make their food? Can they use a microwave? Do they know if a food item is not good to eat so they don't make themselves sick? I once had a student that she honestly did not know what to do if there was a fire. That's a big concern. Her answer to me when I asked her was, I would run out of the house. Well, that's great, but then what are you going to do? So I think these are really important questions, again, to ask and to have on that transition, and have these activities, again, really focused and specific to your child, because it's still an individualized education plan. So again, one hang up I have with these transition activities is a lot of times they're kind of a copy and paste across the board for all students in that district. And that shouldn't be. It should be very specific to your child's needs. The transition goals should be results oriented. So we want to know, what is the end result going to be? These should occur after the child graduates or leaves high school. So it's not just, what are we going to do when they're with us in this building It's what are we going to do to help support them when they're out of our building and they graduated, they're not in high school anymore. We want to look at education and training. So what field of study or type of training do they need? Are they college bound? Maybe a 2-year degree is more appropriate for them. Do they want on-the-job training? Do they want to be a carpenter? And so we look at different internships to get them specialized in carpentry. So those are all important things to look at.
We have a good question here too, Danielle. If the student has medical needs, can you include working with doctors to understand self-care on those? Absolutely. And another thing I've done in the past is hook students and their parents up with associations. So, American Diabetes Association and other associations that do help with advocacy. But absolutely, if, I think the doctor would be glad to work with a student in that regard. And I'm sure, if you could come up with a goal related to it, that it could be incorporated into the IEP. It's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the IS and the student could have a time where they can call that doctor and sit and ask questions and learn more about their disability, their medical needs. Yeah, absolutely. Does your child want full-time or part-time work? And what type of work is desired? Now, the independent living, as you can see, it's if appropriate, and that's what it lists on the IEP. And again, as a parent, don't let the district tell you, well, we don't think your child needs independent living skills, because they may. And it's not dependent on disability category, it's dependent on need. So you may have a child who is college bound, and that's great, but maybe they do struggle with some independent living tasks. So we need to have goals in the IEP for that. Looking at hooking them up with different community resources to help support that independent living. Asking them, do they want to live with the family? Do they want to live independently? Do they want to have a roommate? Do they want to be involved with the YMCA? Do they want to, find a gym to work out in? Whatever it may be. These again are important questions that I know I've said that many times, but again, these are things to think about, because once your child reaches 14, especially, their high school years at, around 16, this, in my opinion, should really be the primary focus. And also, if your child has met their academic goals in the IEP, behavior goals, but they really need these transition goals, your student can still have an IEP, just focusing on these transition goals. So that's why I want to just, prove the point that this is so important. It's so important to talk about these with your child and have the school work on these skills, because once they graduate, they're not going to have the supportive team around them anymore.
Danielle, one thing we've done too in the past for students who are either community college bound or college bound is get them in touch with the disability services office at the college, so that they know what services are available, what accommodations are available, once they're in the higher ed setting, and that they feel a little bit familiar. They also, in some cases, supports for independent living through those offices as well.
Yeah, well, and I had a student on the autism spectrum, and we spent some time looking at specific colleges who have specialized programs for students on the autism spectrum. Like, there are colleges out there who have developed these programs to support students who have specific disabilities. And that student got into one in Ohio, and it was amazing. And they were so excited. And it reduced the anxiety of going to college, because they knew they were going to be supportive. And yeah, they did. They visited, they talked to the disability office, and they had a tour. And so, yes, I think that's huge, because, again, if your student is college bound, that's great, but they may still have some needs. And that's where these transition goals come into play. Okay, I see we have a question. Do you want to get to that before we do the examples?
Yeah, let's see. All right, the question is, upon graduation, who is responsible to support a nonverbal individual's communication needs? Board of DD speech pathologist. As a parent, I will still be available to help some with this, but I might not be able to access the workplace college all the time. Or the team might prefer that parents are not involved. I feel my son would enjoy being like a Walmart greeter using his device, but he would need constant support, personal aid to do this. This is not going to change for him. That is not a support that would or could be faded. So yeah, good question. My guess is a very good start would be the Ohioan opportunities for Ohioans with disabilities to see what type of supported employment environments that he may be able to work with. There's also a search engine kind of through the same office through OOD for a list of service providers that offer both supported employment environments and paid and unpaid work. So I'd say that's a good start. I'm guessing also that there may be some supports for the state school or from the state school. And I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that, Danielle.
I was going to say, definitely OOD, because they have some wonderful resources. And I mean, I do believe because once you have your service or not service provider, what are they called through OOD? I'm blanking. So you have the person that really, I think, hooks you up with everyone else.
Yeah, like the coordinator, I think.
Yes, yes. So they're your go-to person, and they can get your student hooked up with resources that I do believe. I think we have a student who does get some speech therapy in the home setting. So I think that there are definitely some providers out there that do that. I don't know if like a hospital provider would still provide speech therapy to an adult student. I don't know that. But I do think the OD is your best bet. And they do have job coaches and individuals who will go on the job with your child to help transition them into that job and support them, and have communication with the manager of that location they're working in to be able to make sure they're supported when that job coach is not there all the time. So yeah, like Mark said, OOD is your best bet to be able to get hooked up with those services.
That's such a good question, only because those are the types of things that, are good to think about in the transition phase on the IEP. You could easily get hooked up with, the agency OOD who could hook you up with other resources, or even find a program specifically to provide a support at work for him. So yeah, very good question. And I think it's exactly what we're going to talk about. Towards the end too, I'll provide some information for OOD that might be helpful on that question too. Yeah. And we do have another question.
Okay.
Oh, she said thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, so now we have some specific examples from Ocali when it comes to transition goals. And so this is Robert. Following graduation from high school, Robert will work part-time in a body shop making car repairs. So that is what he wanted. That's his goal for his employment. And looking at the post-secondary education, his goal is to take classes at the adult ed program in the area related to his interests, such as small engine repair, locating the right apartment, and meal preparation. So they've really incorporated different things, not just job related, but looking at being able to find housing and knowing how to prepare his own meals. And I feel like that might go into independent living, but regardless. And the independent living goal, immediately following graduation, Robert will live in the family home, taking on more responsibilities to prepare for his move to his own apartment. So those are the goals and the 3 different sections that we have in section 5. And it's focusing on working without a job coach, being present each day, being able to participate in an adult education class, and completing daily living skills such as home safety, cleaning laundry, and making nutritional meals. So you have what he wants to do for employment. You have on here what he's going to do to reach that goal of employment. And then again, how can we support him in the home setting? So this is Antonio. He is college bound. And so he wants to be able to work full time in the field of aerospace engineering, plastics, and polymer manufacturing or pharmaceuticals. That is a mouthful. He would like to go to a 4-year university to study math and or science to prepare for that job that I just mentioned. And then independent, and you can see again, he's college bound and he still has an independent living goal. So his goal is to live in the dorm in a private room, and he needs to focus on researching, selecting, and applying to a university, understanding how to live in a shared space. So what does that mean to share your space with other people? Problem solving daily issues such as scheduling study time, making meal selections, and dealing with schedule changes, and learning to advocate for necessary accommodations in university classes. Okay, and lastly, we have Carla. So following high school, Carla would like to work part-time in a community setting with limited customer traffic, doing jobs of her interest and skill with necessary daily supports. So she needs a little bit more support than the guys we just talked about. And she wants to work part-time, not interested in full-time work. And to get that job, she wants on-the-job training to learn the specific components of her employment. And she will also participate in individual instruction and daily living skills to extend her independence when possible. Independent living, so she would like to continue living in the family home until a small supportive residential setting is available. Carla's goals suggest that her IEP needs to focus on identifying the features of a successful employment environment, because it does sound like she's maybe a little bit picky about the environment she wants, connecting to adult service agencies for employment and residential support, having meaningful academic and community experiences to broaden her exposure to options, and applying academic and daily living skills to authentic settings that reflect what her life will be after graduation. So one thing about the residential support, I will say in Ohio, it is very difficult to get residential support. And again, that's why it's really important to hook up with OOD as early as you possibly can. I mean, you can get hooked up with them. I want to say, because I mean, Help Me Grow starts, at birth to 3, really at 3. I mean, or maybe even a birth, but you can get hooked up with them way early on in your child's life. And if you feel like residential placement is maybe or not residential placement, but residential support or some sort of supported living facility is really in your child's future, then getting that conversation going at an early age, because they have waivers you can put your name on to be able to have those paid by the state and whatnot. So it's really important to, again, think about these things early on and to make sure that you're talking to the right people to ensure your child is supported after graduation. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the fact that your child can attend school until age 22. And this is an IEP team decision. So this is not right for every child. And really, when we talk about your child staying in school, it's really focusing on their progress on those IEP goals and transition goals. It's not maybe because poor attendance or because they're failing some classes. It's really specific to the IEP and the need for special education services and transition services.
But if you're in a situation where the transition hasn't been addressed or hasn't been addressed adequately, a little bit longer, another year to try to meet those goals or get some supports in place can always be helpful.
Yes, very true. So in Ohio, school districts are required to continue providing a free, appropriate public education for a student with a disability until a student receives a regular high school diploma or until they reach 22. So once your child gets a diploma in hand, everything stops. So delaying graduation is really where they stay, and they can walk, they can do a social graduation and walk, but not receiving their diplomas. Once you receive the diploma, again, all things kind of stop there. And then miscellaneous.
Yeah, a couple of things I added here. It's important to know too that anytime that you're going to discuss transition on the IEP, the student has to be invited. So it's a really good time to get the student involved because it can be exciting to talk about these things. Plus, you really get some good input, and I think it's always good for the team to have the student there and voicing his or her, interest and concerns and just participating. It's also important to see for the student to see that they have a team there. They have a team who is interested in his or her well-being, moving beyond high school. So, but they have to be invited. And then transportation can be an issue sometimes, but for the most part, you're working towards a goal on an IEP, and we're talking about getting to a pre-employment workshop, or we're talking about getting to employment. That's part of the IEP. Transportation will be provided by the district or sometimes by the agency or a service provider providing the service. It's also important to know that, although it does start at 14 in Ohio, you don't necessarily hit the ground right away with a community partnership, although you can if you do enough research and early work. That's possible, but for the most part at age 14, what you're going to do is, the student's going to do some exploration, independent exploration. Maybe they'll have some instruction something, let's say a home ec would be, an example, or some type of instruction on daily living skills. And then as they progress to age 16, then you're moving a lot closer to community-based partnerships and programs. And then before I go to the OOD program sheet, let me see. Someone says Ohio DODD says there's no longer a waiver waiting list. They do a waiting list assessment to determine needs and whether they can be met through other alternative resources, or whether a person needs a Medicare waiver. The process is difficult for families. Yeah, I can imagine. So I'm not entirely familiar with that process, but I know that, even the waiting list that existed for a long time has been tough. So,
Yeah. Because
so
you
that
weren't
sounds
on
like
it
they're,
live. You weren't you were getting in.
yeah. Yeah, so that is tough. And I'd say that makes it all the more important to try to work through the other agency, maybe not DODD, but OOD, to see what supports exist there. If you remember at the beginning of this presentation, there is a mandate through the Vocational Rehabilitation Act for OOD and similar state agencies to provide these services for students with disabilities pre and post graduation. So I would really encourage you to do this. It is really for the students who take advantage of it, for our students that we've had take advantage of that partnership, and then the coordination with OOD is really beneficial. One of the few real coordinated agency partnerships that I've seen that works well. So now hopefully this helps you a little bit in knowing what your options are. I'm going to stop the share here. There are a couple things I think it's worthwhile to share from OOD. Bear with me one second. So this is OOD's transition services, transition specific services. So the first is pre-employment transition services, or pre-ETS they call it. And so this is more exploration, figuring out what the student might like, what interests them, what their skills are. So it's early on, and again, that could maybe be started earlier, age 14 or closer to 16, to see and develop, analyze, and then develop those skills for employment, if you think employment is an option. And then this sheet, by the way, is available at OOD's website, and there's a lot of very, very good information, including the application for, you can either apply for vocational rehabilitation services, which is employment, or if you're not eligible for any reason, then you can apply for this pre-employment transition service, or summer youth career exploration. So this is like a summer program where they get, it's unpaid, but 15 hours a week for 3 weeks, where they just get, some job shadowing experience. And again, a little more explorational than it is actual working. But that's kind of phase 2 of what OOD is offering. And then summer youth and actual work experience. So 20 hours a week for 5 weeks in the summer, where they get a little more, and this is paid, by the way, for paid minimum wage for the actual hours worked. And so you develop, and it not only is it work experience, it's specifically a program developed to build your skills in the workplace. So it could be very beneficial, and again, part of the goal in an IEP. And then non-permanent job development, which is a temporary job that they have for a period of time, just to again see how the student performs or likes the particular placement. And I'm sure any OOD coordinator could explain this and the options and all the nuances much better than we can. But I, again, have had clients utilize, in particular, the pre-employment services, the pre-ETS. and have seen very good results. And by the way, you know, the coordinator can and will attend IEP meetings and provide their input. They have to be invited if the parent requests it. So by all means, that is valuable input on the IEP team if you have some coordination with OOD. And there is a question here. Can the IEP team discourage or refuse to offer rigorous academic instruction for a student who does not appear college material, yet he is able to benefit from learning and desires to study using alternative communication methods with the family? The school refuses to use the same communication method. Yeah, I'd say there's probably an issue there. You know, they should have goals that you know, that the student could make progress from. And I don't know what the determination would be that they're not college material. But you know, it sounds like there's something to be worked out there. Danielle?
Yeah, I was gonna say, it kind of sounds like there's two different questions. The first one, I think that your child, you know, your child's independent needs are important. So if they can attack, you know, the college readiness classes, then by all means, we should be focusing on that. And you know, like you said, benefiting from learning and desires to study. That's awesome. So let's continue focusing and pushing him and raising that bar, right? If he can meet those expectations, then keep raising that bar. And then with the alternative communication method, can you maybe pop in the chat and tell me what that is? Is it like a device? Is it sign language? I'm just curious.
Yeah, and while he or she does that in the chat, you know, I'd say too that oh, there it is, supported typing.
Okay. I don't know
Yeah,
why
I don't.
they refuse to use
Yeah,
that.
that's strange. It seems like an easy one to add as a support or an accommodation, so, or assistive technology. Yeah, you know, and it'll be important too. I don't know how old the student is, but you know, to get the student's input in that future planning session or
Yeah.
section, and then hear from the student about what their goals and desires are. Unless there's a really good reason not to add that, you know, goals that would help him or her get to college. I don't, you know, it'd have to be a pretty good reason not to do that.
Right. Yeah. And I don't know why they wouldn't allow the student to use, you know, their other way of communicating. If they supported typing as a way to communicate, then they definitely should be allowing that.
Mhm.
They wouldn't.
Yes. Yeah, she says some believe it's not evidence-based, but I don't know. It just seems like a pretty easy accommodation to make.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah, and I suppose there can be justified reasons on occasion, but it sounds like this would be something that's solvable, especially with, you know, a clear identification of the student's goals.
Right. Maybe you need like an assistive technology assessment, you know, to have someone come in either in the district or through the ESC or a state support team to maybe assess your student's ability to utilize technology or being able to try different things out and see what works best. Maybe you need to ask your district for that because maybe they just, I don't know, maybe the district doesn't feel like what your student is using is beneficial. I don't know. So maybe asking for an assistive tech assessment.
That's a really good idea. Yeah, I like that. And yeah, go
Oh,
ahead.
do we go over the slide? All right. So talked a lot about transition. So why is a transition plan important? Well, a rich transition plan will help prepare students to lead productive and independent adult lives. I always tell my own children, that's my job as a mother, is to make sure they can be productive and be independent. So that's really what we need to focus on. Provide students with effective transition services in order to promote post-secondary employment and education training, and to meet the unique needs of students with disabilities by preparing them for future education, employment, and independent living. Again, it should be individualized. Like I said, that's probably my biggest frustration when it comes to these transition plans. I just really feel like it's a copy and paste of what everyone else is getting. And that is really unfair. That does a really big disservice to your child. So I think it's maybe not at 14. I'm okay to let that slide because I mean, we're talking middle school. it really is exploration at this point in time. But once your child is 16, you really need to advocate for strong transition goals that are focused in on what your child's needs are. And again, PENS, preferences, interest, needs, and strengths. So making sure all of those are covered in your goals.
All right. I think that takes us to the end. We are going to have a short Q&A with me and Danielle and Emily Durrell from Disability Rights Ohio. And excuse me, you're welcome to ask questions about our presentation today or about anything else special education related. We'll have from about 10 to up to 10:20 if we need to, but you can submit questions in the Q&A or in the chat. Some are coming by chat. But before I forget to mention it, this was Transition to Adulthood. And if you want to sign up for procedural rights and dispute resolution, which is the last in the series, the Power to the Parents workshops, you can do that through the link I just put in the chat, same way you signed up for this. And let's see, we can go ahead and start the Q&A session. And if anyone has any questions, you can drop them in the box.
We love questions. So anything at all that's on your mind, like Mark said, transition related or not.
Hi, Emily.
Hello, it's nice to be here. I'm Emily Durrell from Disability Rights Ohio, and I'm a special education attorney.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. Have either of you had situations where students are employed or they use their current employment as part of the transition plan?
No, I don't think I have. I love your
Yeah.
Emily, you have?
No, I have not either. Although I do have students who are currently working and they are on a transition plan, but they haven't been integrated.
Got it.
No, it makes sense though. It really does make sense though to incorporate that. No questions, Mark.
We must have done such a good job.
I
that
know.
We've answered everything.
So thorough.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks anyway for sitting in and listening in. And for
put something in there, Mark. Someone asked the question.
Okay, here we go. I feel like I'm basically spinning my wheels with the IEP team regarding my son's education and support for transition. The process takes so long and he only has 2 more years to go. Yep, good question. First thing I would say, my advice to start any conversation where it doesn't seem like you're getting anywhere is to identify what the rule is. The rule is that the school is obligated to provide this type of planning on the IEP. And if it's not getting anywhere, I would use the ability to call an IEP team meeting anytime to call it and just make sure it's addressed. And it can, time passes fastly sometimes. If he's only got 2 years to go, I think probably the best thing to do would be fill out the application at OOD for, there are 2 that you have to do, but they're really small, for vocational rehab and then for other pre-employment ETS services, and talk with a counselor there, a coordinator, and have that coordinator help you get the ball rolling. But it's going to take an IEP team IEP meeting to get that going. And yeah, open to your thoughts too, Danielle and Emily.
I mean, Emily, if you want to chime in, I feel like I'm always speaking.
Well, I think before that IEP meeting with the school, it also may be helpful to write down what are your specific concerns and what are your specific goals. You can even email that to the IEP team ahead of time, so you're both coming to the table ready to discuss your main concerns. And I see here you followed up. Is it helpful to get an attorney or advocate involved? I think definitely. Not to toot my own horn, I'm an advocate as well. You can reach out to Disability Rights Ohio. I think you can reach out to Albie Weicker. And then the Coalition OCCD also provides parent mentors in specific school districts and also across the state. If you'd be interested in working with them, they might be able to give you advice more attuned to your situation, because it sounds like there's a lot that's going on there.
Agreed. And again, with those 3 questions we have posed with the transition assessments, maybe your district needs to do further assessments or more individualized assessments to be able to focus in on what your child needs and how to write those goals to be appropriate to the future.
We have another question from an attendee. This is my first time here and I'm just learning about IEPs and such. The school district failed my oldest son and I don't want them to do the same with my youngest. So far, it seems appropriate, but how can I be sure? Yeah, very good question. I suppose, again, it comes down to, what concerns you might have. If your youngest son is now transition age appropriate, then I would, initiate, make sure the process is initiated and start exploration by 14, and then, coordinate to, maybe an agency partnership with OOD at 16. But, the question is whether or not the goals are challenging him on the IEP and whether or not he's meeting the goals over time and progress is being made.
I was going to say progress reports. Look at those progress reports. And when we look at adequate progress, because what does adequate progress really mean? Look at those percentages. Or if you feel like you need more information on whether or not your child truly is making progress, again, you can ask for that data, ask for what they're using to really report that progress. Because if your child is not meeting those goals, or let's just say it's very stagnant and you're not seeing a lot of growth, then that's when you need to talk about those goals and if the goals are appropriate. Or for instance, I was just in a meeting last week and the child's IEP isn't due till February. But we pushed to have those goals rewritten because the child met all the goals. He actually met them in the spring. And so if your child is meeting the goals, fantastic. Well, let's not wait until the annual IEP meeting to write new goals. So let's go ahead and up that bar and keep pushing the boundary to where they can be successful. So again, look at those progress reports, listen to what your child says when they come home, if they're feeling really overly frustrated with a certain subject, or again, maybe they think it's too easy. So listen to what your child is saying. And yeah, call an IEP team meeting. That's your right as a parent to call one at any point in time. So if you have questions, like Emily said, you can certainly email them just to get the ball rolling on getting some questions out there. So you can have a really good pinpointed meeting to talk about your concerns.
And Mark, someone in the chat said, can we see the panelists by chance? So maybe because you're sharing this PowerPoint, they can't see us.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's better.
There we are.
Okay.
Hopefully you can see us now. Yeah, I agree with everything Danielle and Mark said. Another idea may be if you are believing that the school may be incorrectly reporting, where he's at and what he can do to make progress, you can always pursue an independent educational evaluation, kind of appeal that ETR. That's a good way to get a third party to assess your child and make recommendations, what kind of accommodations or curriculum resources he can use to progress through the academics.
Yeah, and an IE can be requested anytime the district does their own evaluation. So whether that's an ETR or if they did, I'm trying to think, I don't know, a different assessment, an FBA, there we go, I couldn't think of one. If the district does an FBA and you're like, I don't know if I agree with that, you can ask for an outside evaluation for that as well.
And you may have answered this in your last answer, Danielle, but there's a question, if transition activities are complete, should the IEP be rewritten? Yeah, same thing with the goals that Danielle was talking about. If the goals are being met, then they're not stringent enough. I mean, you certainly want to make progress on the timeline that the goal is written, but when that goal is met, it's time to adopt a new goal.
I think especially when you have a new IEP, because really you don't have a lot of baseline data to go off of. And so I don't want to say taking a stab in the dark, but when you write these goals for a new IEP for the very first one, it is kind of a guessing game on where you think the child's going to be. So yeah, they may meet those goals in a few months, or let's say over the summer they had really great growth and they can maintain that, then yes, absolutely call a meeting and ask for ask for updated goals.
Yeah. And another question which ties in a little bit, it says many activities I've seen are very broad. Is that normal? I'd say that 14 to 16 range, they're just, a little bit too standard, I would say. It's like, the student will call 3, potential colleges, that may be a little early for that too, but, or the student will do like 1 or 2 things over the course of the semester to, explore their career. That's probably not enough. I think they have to be more specific than that. And they have to put a little bit more of an obligation for exploration on the IEP. So yeah, some of them are too broad. And look, things happen, a lot of what we're talking about already, questions we're answering are, sometimes there's just a lack of communication between the parent and the student and the team. And so Emily's suggestion to, send a quick email and say, here are my concerns, can we have a meeting to talk about that, is excellent, because communication's half the battle. And then the other thing is sometimes apathy is a problem. And that's just like special education professionals are overworked. The directors, the coordinators, the teachers, all overworked. And if they can copy and paste what was on Jimmy's IEP to Jane's IEP, and satisfy the transition related goal, then they'll do that. And then sometimes that's not good enough for Jane. So, you have to be an advocate and say, look, we need to do better than this, tidbit exploration. We need to have some real affirmative goal, task and goals that will move this child forward. And you do just have to be an advocate for that.
Well, and I think, looking for housing information in your area, I think that could be a valuable skill to do, but let's get a little more, specific. Are they calling around? Are they looking online? And once that activity has been completed, then let's put something else on there. I think that's my annoyance, is we have these goals for an entire school year. So let's say they do this in October and you just wrote the IEP. So then you're not working on anything then for the rest of the school year. So again, asking those questions, when do you think you're going to do that? Can we update the school once that's done? Or maybe make it more specific, because right now it's pretty broad. So again, being vocal and asking those questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to question what's happening, what's being said.
And I think a good place to start when you're asking those questions is thinking, what is the student going to be learning from the school precisely? So if the goal is looking for housing information, is he learning how to look for housing information? Is he learning about a fair price for houses? Is he learning how to contact a realtor? What exactly is he supposed to be learning? And then get those specifics added into the goal so you understand precisely what he's doing when he's looking for housing information.
Very good point. And then are they recording what he finds? Okay, when he went through the exercise, now what? Now, what do we know from it?
Yeah.
All good points. Any other questions? All right, here's one. Are there any post-high school supports available to individuals that have intensive support needs and who want to attend college? Would this also be OOD, or are there any other specific resources that you know of?
Well, I think, again, kind of maybe goes into looking at colleges who have specific programs for your child's specific needs, because there are many out there. When you look at students with learning disabilities, students with autism, I'm sure there are probably others out there that I'm not aware of, but so I think if your child is college bound and they want to go to college and they need some additional support, maybe looking at that, doing some research and seeing what colleges are out there and how supportive some colleges can be. And I think I would assume, I should say, that if your child applies and gets accepted into that program, there probably are a lot of different supports in the college itself, on campus, probably in the community. So my guess would be it would be a more supportive environment.
And these types of supports are often pretty localized. So I work at a statewide level. So unfortunately, I don't really know what's available in your area. So you may want to reach out to OOD. The transition coordinator of your school should also have some ideas of opportunities available in your area. County boards of DD have great ideas of opportunities. Just really reach out to people in your area, I guess, and see what's available there.
It may be useful to, when you go to OOD's website, there is a search engine of service providers that say specifically what those service providers do, and you can search by county. I was looking at Franklin County last night, and there were, hundreds of service providers, but each of them had kind of an individual or unique focus. So my guess is there are service providers who help individuals with multiple disabilities or maybe even lower incidence of for some type of employment related support. But it is a very specific question, but I do think ultimately the answer is going to be probably through OOD or OOD's database that you'll be able to find some support. And then there is a question that followed. What if the IEP team isn't willing to use the recommendations from a private outside assessment?
Yeah, and I always tell my families this, even when you go get an IE, honestly, all the district has to do is consider that IE. They don't have to do anything with it. They just have to consider it and look at it, but that may not change. Let's just say the qualification for special education services. It may not change. So again, an IE is not an end all be all. It's not, okay, I'm going to slap this down the district's desk and now things are going to happen. That's not always the case. So I have run into that in several occasions, unfortunately.
It often becomes a waiting game where you're going to have to look at those progress reports coming back home and see, is he making or is your student making progress with what they're currently doing? If they're not, then you can bring up that IE again and say like, hey, they were recommending this stuff. He's not making progress on these goals with this type of support. Can now we, revisit and talk about adding these supports in?
Yeah, great point.
All right, we'll give it another 15 seconds or so. All right, well, thank you everyone for attending. I hope you learned a thing or two at the workshop and at the Q&A session. Please sign up for next month's workshop, and you can do that through the link in the chat. And certainly if you have any questions, you can just reply to the email that you got, the reminder for this workshop, and we'd be happy to try to get an answer for you. Thank you, Emily and Danielle, for joining again on Saturday.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And if you're seeing us after this Zoom, it's a separate link to our waiting rooms. It's not going to be this link. So check your email and I'll see some of you later.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.